Hello, my name is Marcus Stacey, and on behalf of the RIP Swim, I'd like to discuss with you the risks of hypothermia. This talk is specifically targeted at the water safety personnel, but it has relevance to anybody involved in the RIP Swim. Hypothermia is a risk when the body loses heat faster than it can produce heat. Now, there are many different definitions of what hypothermia is. If you want an exact temperature, anything less than 35 degrees is considered hypothermic. But you must remember, some people can tolerate colder conditions than others. Hypothermia is a continuum. Some texts will talk about the 5 different stages of hypothermia and give symptoms and signs for each of those different stages. The reality, particularly for monitoring swimmers in the water, is not that clear cut. So for this presentation, I've broken it down to 2 categories, mild and severe. The symptoms of mild hypothermia is when someone goes from just being cold to describing themselves as I'm cold to the core. Their core body temperature has dropped below 35 degrees. They'll start to shiver in an uncontrollable fashion. They can lose coordination, and that's because their muscles are becoming stiff. In swimmers, you can see this stiffness in the muscles primarily in their hands. Instead of reaching out with a nice flat hand at the catch, their fingers will start to clump. It'll start to look like a fist. And this is a really good indicator that the patient or the swimmer is starting to get really cold. Now, if someone continues to lose body heat, they will move from mild hypothermia to severe hypothermia. If you want a particular temperature, 32 degrees is considered severely hypothermic. The first sign to look for is the shivering stops. The patient will become very uncoordinated. In a swimmer, you can start to see a very disorganized or chaotic swimming stroke. They might stop kicking and their legs will drop below the surface. The swimmer or the person will say that they don't feel cold anymore. That's because they're confused. This is a real problem now. This confusion can lead to unconsciousness if left unchecked. And I was talking before about muscles getting stiff. Well, now the heart gets stiff. And that will cause an irregular heartbeat, the cardiac arrhythmias. And if left unchecked, unfortunately, that can then lead to death. Some of the risk factors for hypothermia are pretty self-explanatory. The temperature. The temperature of the water and the air temperature in combination with any wind are going to cause a risky environment. The time in the water. Obviously, the longer you spend in the water, the greater risk. The level of activity of the swimmer is something that we need to be concerned about. A strong swimmer who has to constantly stop and wait for slower swimmers is at much greater risk of suffering hypothermia, and it's going to take them a long time to warm up again. Lastly, the amount of insulation that the swimmer has, whether that is natural or the swimmer wearing a wetsuit. There are some other factors that we need to be aware of. Anxiety, stress, dehydration, and not eating prior to take on the swim will all increase the risk of hypothermia to the swimmer. At the RIP Swim, kayakers are best placed to look for the danger signs of hypothermia. Before the swim even starts, they need to take note of what the conditions are and who might be at a higher risk. Early in the swim, watch closely at the various techniques in the group. Do they have a strong kick? Are they reaching out? What is their mood like? Pay particular attention to learn what normal is for the swimmer. Then, when things start to go wrong, you'll be able to identify that, hey, this swimmer's stroke isn't as strong as it used to be. Look for that clumping of fingers I was talking about. Their kick, is it still strong? Is it still on the surface of the water? Listen to what they're saying. Listen to their mood. Are they still happy to be there, or do they just want to get it over and done with? And then the obvious one, the swimmer complaining of being cold, and you can hardly understand them through the chattering of teeth. In order to manage the risk of hypothermia, the swimmers need to be briefed before they even get in the water. They need to make sure that they're properly prepared, fed and watered. As a kayaker, if you notice someone suffering any symptoms and signs, you need to warn them, let them know, talk to them. And any concerns you might have must be communicated to the race director. Lastly, you need to stay close. Just keep a very close eye on that swimmer. Make sure that they're okay. It's up to the race director as to how they're going to manage the situation, and it will depend on a variety of factors. Essentially, if a swimmer can safely continue to the finish, then they'll be given every opportunity to do so. It may get to a point, though, when we have no choice. A swimmer should be immediately withdrawn from the event if there is any change to their conscious state. That is, the patient or the swimmer becomes confused. If that swimmer is no longer shivering, their speech is gone from you can't understand them because of the chattering teeth to it's now slurred and almost drunk-like. Or there is a lack of coordination. This is a real concern for someone who is in the water. We at least need them to help themselves. These signs indicate a major health crisis. To complicate things, one of the biggest signs is the confusion. The swimmer might not feel cold anymore. They might not listen to reason. And being told they have to stop could make them aggressive and argumentative. At this point, they need help, but they might not want it, and they might not be able to help themselves. Even the action of simply holding onto the kayak might no longer be possible because of their muscle stiffness. A quick review for the first aid of hypothermia. Mild hypothermia is easily managed, and it's pretty much what your mum taught you. Just warm them up. But do it gently, do it slowly. Let the patient warm themselves up from the inside out. To help them do that, obviously, remove them from the cold environment, and importantly, dry them completely. Now, wetsuit. Do you remove it? Do you leave it on? It depends on the situation. If you're on an open deck exposed boat, it might be best to leave the wetsuit on. Give them something warm to drink, and some simple carbohydrates will help. Now, I'd just like to give you a very quick first aid tip. When it comes to managing hypothermia, space blankets are great, but they do have their limitations. Any breath of wind and they just fly off, and it's hard to keep them close. The best thing to use is a simple garbage bag. Put a hole in it for the patient's head. Excuse me, it is a bit hard to do it on yourself, much easier to do it on another person. But you put their head through that hole, pull the garbage bag down over the patient's body. You can put another garbage bag on the bottom half. It doesn't matter whether you're putting it over the top of clothes or you can wrap a blanket around the outside, but try and keep as much air out of the garbage bag as possible, and it works a treat. It's fantastic, easy to use, and it won't blow off like a space blanket will. The management of someone with severe hypothermia is essentially the same, except there's one key point. You must handle this person very, very gently. To the point I would consider actually cutting a wetsuit off, because the physical effort of the patient trying to get themselves out of a wetsuit, or us getting the patient out of the wetsuit, is too much. Yes, very dramatic to have to cut someone's expensive wetsuit off, but I don't want that person to move any more than they have to. You must remember, severe hypothermia is a medical emergency. Now, there's a syndrome that cold swimmers will experience. It's called afterdrop. When someone is swimming, their head, heart and feet are all at the same level, and the body adapts. Once a cold swimmer, stands up, we're asking blood to go to muscles that haven't been used, the legs. You'll have warm blood going through very cold muscles. And what will happen is that blood will actually cool down before it returns to the heart. So once you remove a swimmer from a cold environment, you can expect that their core body temperature will actually reduce before it increases. With this in mind, we need anybody who is on shore with the swimmers after they've completed the swim just to keep an eye on the swimmers to make sure they're okay for a period of time after they've left the water. Lastly, but certainly no less important, make sure you look after yourselves. Kayakers will be out of the water, so sometimes they'll be experiencing colder conditions than those in the water. Make sure you dress warmly. Make sure that you eat and drink plenty before and during the event. And if you yourself get cold, let the race director know as soon as you're starting to feel any signs of even mild hypothermia. I hope you found this video interesting and useful, and I look forward to seeing you at the next swim.